Seok, and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Russian diplomat Dmitry Peskov speaks on the impending Witkoff-Putin meeting to be held in Moscow. The diplomat also speaks on India-Russia's defense ties and a potential $100 billion trade with India by 2030. As Russia-Ukraine peace talks gains momentum, U.S. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner are to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow this week. Russian forces have claimed that they have captured the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk, which is a key logistics hub. However, Kyiv has not confirmed the Russian claims yet. White House defends U.S. attack on a boat from Venezuela as lawful, as White House defends U.S. admiral's decision to conduct multiple strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug smuggling vessel starting from September, saying that he had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's authorization. A diplomatic clash between China and Japan over recent remarks by Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi is heating up at the United Nations. Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong has sent a second letter to Secretary General Antonio Guterres while urging Tokyo to retract the earlier remarks. Chinese and Japanese Coast Guard ships have collided in fresh confrontation near disputed Daioku Senkaku Islands, which are claimed by both as their territory. While China's spokesperson for the Coast Guard has said that the Chinese vessels took necessary control measures and issued warnings to the Japanese boat. White House says that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth approved the second strikes on an alleged Venezuelan drug boat, but also clarifies that he did not issue order to kill everyone on board. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has warned that China poses national security threats to the United Kingdom. This comes ahead of a crucial decision on the Chinese super embassy in the UK next week. Now, for this hour, we start with Indonesia. Indonesia is facing worsening humanitarian disaster on Sumatra Island. The death toll from floods and landslides have now climbed to 604 people, and 464 people are still missing, according to the National Disaster Agency. Search and rescue teams are racing across 3 provinces, while about 570,000 residents have been displaced. Roads are buried or washed out, and communications are down, forcing aid to be flown in. North Sumatra is the hardest hit, with homes crushed by mud and entire villages cut off. A vital route through Aden coating in North Tapanuli has been severed, blocking access to Sibolga, a port city badly damaged by days of relentless rain. Survivors say they have lost everything and urgently need food, water, and medicine. President Prabowo says relief efforts are at full force and stresses that Indonesia must strengthen climate resilience and local disaster preparedness. Indonesia is facing a worsening humanitarian disaster on Sumatra Island. The death toll from the floods and landslides have climbed to 604 people, and 464 people are still missing, according to the National Disaster Agency. Search and rescue teams are racing across 3 provinces, where about 570,000 residents have been displaced. Roads are buried or washed out, and communications are down, forcing aid to be flown in. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Vibhuti Rai. He's an environmentalist, joins us live from Lucknow, India. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, given the scale of flooding and landslides in Sumatra in Southeast Asia, now what underlying environmental and land use factors, how do you think these have led to or may have intensified the impact of this disaster?
Well, there are several reasons that I see. The Sumatra has lot many hilly terrains. At the same time, their infrastructure is not as good as it should be. And there's a lot of mudslides already. They were happening in the past, but the government should have made infrastructure so that once the rains of that magnitude were supposed to happen, and that can be done with the help of satellite data, it was possible to at least save many of these calamities, many people who died, because these rains have created weak zones in an already stretched environment or geologically unstable system there. So the rains have actually created the very large scale mudslide. And because most of the villages and habitation areas were very close to these hilly terrain, they have all been infested with not only floods, but at the same time with the rain, with the landslide. So I think there are more geological reasons for that, and for future, I think the government of Indonesia and maybe many other countries who are part of the network, they should put in inputs for making this area resilient to rainfall led landslides.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Rai, please stay with us as we have a breaking news to take. We'll come back to you. Now, breaking news, Indonesia is facing an escalating disaster on Sumatra Island. The National Disaster Agency now says the death toll from last week's floods and landslides has climbed to 712 people. More than 500 people are still missing, and the number of those affected has surged to around 1.1 million people across 3 provinces. Heavy rain has washed out roads, and widespread power outages are hampering rescue efforts as emergency teams continue searching for survivors. Authorities warn that the toll could rise further as access to remote areas slowly reopens. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Sir Vibhuti Rai. He's an environmentalist, joins us live from Lucknow, India. Thank you very much, Sir Rai, for staying with us.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think is government's responsibility? What specific policy or community level measures should government prioritize to reduce the risk of such catastrophic events?
I think it's both government and people's participation, and maybe corporate world should come in, and at least those areas which are prone to such disasters in the past and maybe this time, the area should have been properly mapped, and on the basis of this mapping, how in case of certain level of rainfall or storm, that can make the area very susceptible to
Here we may have lost connection with Mr. Vibhuti Rai. He joined us as an environmentalist from Lucknow. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Rai. Now we move the focus to Europe. Residents and former soldiers in Ukraine's Kyiv are expressing doubt over Russian claims of capturing Pokrovsk. They point out that there has been no confirmation from Ukrainian authorities and warn the reports could be a propaganda ahead of the peace talks. Many citizens emphasize the importance of defending every part of Ukrainian territory, while also acknowledging that negotiations may require direct engagement with opposing forces. Despite the uncertainty, there is hope that Ukraine is maintaining control and that diplomats are handling the talks professionally. Let's in fact listen into what some of the soldiers have shared.
Чесно кажучи, не вірю, тому що немає підтвердженої інформації з боку Генерального штабу. Навпаки, йде суперечлива інформація і спростовують Я думаю, що це розганяється перед переговорами, які мають бути, і тому інформація, скоріш за все, не відповідає.
Для нас важливий кожен метр нашої землі, а прив'язуватись до територіальної Покровськ, не Покровськ, Бахмут, також важливе місце. Нам треба боротися за кожен метр. А як повпливати, це вже залежить від професіоналізму наших дипломатів. Як би це було, може комусь не сподобається, але щоб домовитись про мир, нам треба домовлятися з тим, з ким ми воюємо. Тому бігати до американців, потім їхати, оцей грати в поломаний телефон, це тягне, це моя особиста думка. Да, дипломатія працює трохи по-іншому, але нам треба або сідати за стіл переговорів, якщо хочуть домовлятися, або продовжувати воювати.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us again. Good to see you. Ben, please share your analysis on the current ongoing situation between Ukraine and Russia on Pokrovsk.
Well, the battle for Pokrovsk has been going on for more than a year. A bit more than a year ago that the Russians took the city of Avdiivka, and then they've been advancing further into Donbass. And as you mentioned, Pokrovsk is a key hub, a logistics hub that supplies the whole of the eastern front for the Ukrainian armed forces with everything they need. So its fall is a serious problem to continuing the fight against the Russians. But that advance from Avdiivka to Pokrovsk, it's only 41 kilometers between the two, and it's taken a whole year for the Russian forces to get there, which highlights just how bitter, how awful this battle is. And it's been in slow collapse for about 2 weeks. The Russians infiltrated special forces into the city at the beginning of November, and it's come down to a Stalingrad-like battle between the two sides. There's no fixed front, that they're jumping from building to building. But according to the latest reports, the Russians are claiming that they've taken complete control of the city. However, it's clear that there's ongoing street battles. But I think that the majority of the city has been occupied by Russia. And this piece of news is key that it comes exactly today, because in a few hours' time, the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is going to meet with Putin to discuss a ceasefire plan to end the war in Ukraine. And Russia taking this city gives Putin extra leverage in that discussion, because his line all the way along has been either you accept my terms without compromise, or we will just take what we want by force. And here they are, having taken a key city on the day those negotiations begin.
And what do you think, or what could happen, as we know that the ceasefire talks are ongoing, and U.S. delegation is headed to, including Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner is headed to Russia now. Do you think anything realistic, feasible can come out of this?
Well, it's all speculation at this point, but the US floated this plan, which they drew up in cooperation with the Kremlin. However, the Ukrainians did have some input. They were shown the draft and added some things to it. Nevertheless, the plan was then taken to the Europeans, who introduced a lot of alternative ideas that the Kremlin will reject out of hand. And I think now what we're seeing is a split between the US and Europe, that they simply can't agree on a draft. And so what I'm expecting to happen today is for Witkoff to do the original version of the plan they drew up with the Russians, and agree that with Putin, and then take it back and present it to Ukraine as a fait accompli and try and force Ukraine to accept it. And I'm pretty certain that Zelensky will reject it out of hand, and he will be backed by the Europeans. And then we're into a really messy diplomatic situation where you've got the US leaning on Ukraine, who's being backed by Europe, and a split between Europe and the US, while Trump tries to get this sort of Russianized version of the plan through.
Right. Please, Mr. Aris, please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, we stay on this topic. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said on Tuesday that Ukraine is taking its diplomatic work absolutely seriously as talks with U.S. officials continue. He has warned that Russia has launched new disinformation campaigns aimed at undermining the meetings between Ukrainian and U.S. negotiators. President Zelensky has confirmed that the Geneva document, a framework for potential peace discussions, has been further developed. He has added that Ukraine is actively working to bring more European partners into the process, aiming to build broader support for any eventual settlement. The president also said that he had received a full report from the Ukrainian negotiating team currently holding talks in the United States, calling the discussions constructive and essential for Ukraine's long-term security. Meanwhile, a plane used by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff has arrived in Moscow. Putin will be receiving Witkoff and Kushner in the Kremlin. Translators will accompany Witkoff and Kushner to their meeting with Putin. According to media reports, Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev will meet U.S. Special Representative Steve Witkoff in Moscow today. Witkoff, along with Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of U.S. President Donald Trump, is also expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, continuing our discussion, with Zelensky warning about new Russian disinformation campaigns targeting the U.S.-Ukraine talks in particular, what reports are you hearing or anything you can share with us in regards of that these narratives are being pushed towards frontline troops or civilian populations?
Well, it pertains to what I was talking about before. I mean, the different versions of the plan. So you mentioned Geneva, the summit in Geneva where the European leaders met. They took the original US 28-point plan and then they hacked it around and ended up with a 19-point plan, which is extremely different to the US version and represents European and particularly Ukrainian interests. And now we've come into a sort of rhetorical battle between the sides in order to try and pressure both America and Europe into agreeing on a single version that is both acceptable to Ukraine and at the same time might fly with the Americans. But then for Zelensky, this is a huge political problem because if he doesn't get representation, things like he doesn't want to give up territory, things like he wants to keep the door to NATO membership open. And if he just capitulates to a US-led plan, which is full of Russian demands, then at home, he's already extremely unpopular because he's caught up in the biggest corruption scandal of his career. And he faces the possibility, there's chatter in Kiev that he might be ousted, that he might resign by the end of the year. And so for him, it's existential on a personal level as well as existential on a Ukrainian level. And so everybody's throwing out these barbs. And again, I think part of the message that you just mentioned is aimed at the Ukrainian population in order to, to exonerate Zelensky and saying, look, this isn't my problem, this is Russian disinformation, all these other ideas that are being proposed. But also at the Americans too, and the Russians, they're trying to stick to their guns and get Putin to make some real concessions, particularly on the region, on the question of territories, because Putin, and the whole talk today will turn on that, in so much as Putin is insisting that Ukraine give up all of the Donbass, and the Ukrainians are flatly refusing to do that.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Ben Aris for joining us today as a journalist from Berlin and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus to Middle East. Qatar, a key mediator in the Gaza negotiations, said on Tuesday that it hopes Israel and Hamas can soon move into a new phase of peace talks. This follows their ceasefire agreement reached in October. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari has said that Doha believes both sides must be pushed very, very soon towards the next stage of negotiations. He has noted that upcoming discussions would involve sensitive issues, including Hamas fighters still positioned inside the tunnels located in Israeli-controlled areas of Gaza. Qatar continues to play a central role in trying to shape a long-term deal that could reduce tensions and move the conflict closer to a political resolution. Now for this discussion, we welcome Sasha Machta. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sasha, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how might Qatar's push for a new phase, how do you think, what's your analysis on current readiness? Do you think both sides, Hamas and Israel, are ready to leverage the negotiation further towards more sensitive issues?
After a few weeks, several weeks of the first phase of the ceasefire, the successful return of the living hostages, and of 26 deceased hostages, the preparation for phase two of the deal appears to be reaching its boiling point. We are at a stage where Hamas still has to return two deceased bodies. One of them is actually supposed to be returned today pending forensic review to make sure that it's truly the body corresponding to one of the remaining hostages. And this means that phase two would be able to begin. The pressure on behalf of Qatar that is exerted on Hamas is crucial. This pressure that came from Qatar and also Turkey was actually what led to the deal happening in the first place. Hamas are ideologically and financially backed by Qatar, who are their patrons, and the new updates that we've been hearing in the past few hours that Qatar is insisting on pushing Hamas and Israel to phase two, this is significant and should be an optimistic sign. Regarding phase two, this is actually the demilitarization and disarmament of Hamas. I don't believe that Hamas will agree to this without any challenge or pressure, which is why this Qatari demand and pressure is so critical to the success of phase two. We know that the disarmament is what is standing between a temporary ceasefire as it is now and an actual peace. We know that a future with Hamas in Gaza is not a possibility. Israel has made that clear, and the whole region understands that Hamas must be removed from power, both their arms and their ruling over Gazan civilians. So we believe that with the ISF coming in soon, which has been approved already by the UN, and other plans that are being floated by the US Trump administration, might be a way to force and actually put some military pressure, not just diplomatic pressure, on Hamas to leave, because they're not going to willingly disarm, which is what is required for phase two. And we're going to have to wait and see for the returning bodies of hostages and the pressure being put on. And let's hope for good news and for the continuation of this deal.
And building on that, what do you think, what political challenges could arise further as mediators attempt to transition from to the next phase in terms of longer-term agreement? Do you think anything that could be solving this crisis among them for long-term, do you think anything has been reached which could solve this crisis?
One of the main challenges, as you mentioned, is actually the ISF itself, getting countries to voluntarily send their soldiers to Gaza. Of course, as long as Hamas does not disarm willingly, which is what they should be doing as stipulated by the agreement, many countries are going to have a challenge in sending their soldiers to actually fight and disarm Hamas themselves. That's not what they want to do, and Israel understands that. The only party that ever had an interest in militarily disarming Hamas was Israel. And of course, this is not an option anymore. Israel does not want to go back to war. So we're going to see challenges coming up regarding the ISF actually beginning their operation in Gaza, whether this will come before the disarmament and they will have to face Hamas, or whether this will be a peacekeeping force, as the King of Jordan mentioned, not actually one that enforces the deal militarily, but one that is there just to keep quiet. So that's one of the other challenges, and I believe that the solution of dividing Gaza in two, one under control by Hamas temporarily and one under the Israeli Yellow Line side, is an option that seems more and more realistic, especially because winter is coming and the people of Gaza that are living under Hamas control can't tolerate another brutal winter under control by terrorists. So the US might begin building housing in the Israeli side and allow for innocent Gazans to come and rebuild this area. And of course, this would put even more pressure on Hamas for their disarmament.
Madam President. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Sasha Machta for joining us as a political commentator from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus to Europe. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said that China poses national security threats to the UK, but insists that deeper business ties with Beijing are still on the national interest. Speaking to business leaders, Starmer said Britain must move past what he called years of hot and cold policy swings and take a serious, consistent approach to China. He's argued that the UK can protect its security while continuing to trade with China, rejecting the idea that Britain must choose between economic opportunity and national safety. His remarks follow the collapse of a high-profile spying case after prosecutors said the government had previously avoided formally describing China as a national security threat. China's embassy has called Starmer's comments groundless accusations. Starmer has also criticized past conservative governments for letting the relationship deteriorate, noting that other European leaders have visited China multiple times, while no British Prime Minister has been there since 2018. Now for this discussion, we welcome Andrew K.P. Long. He's a independent China strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us again. Good to see you. And now looking at this, how is Beijing likely to interpret the UK's attempt to label China as a security threat while simultaneously calling for deeper economic cooperation? What strategic adjustments might China consider?
Well, I think the first question people need to examine is whether what kind of national security threat the United Kingdom is facing from China. Is China going to invade the United Kingdom? Is China going to invade any still remaining British territories in the region? There are none. Is China trampling upon British citizens in the region? No. So what is the national security threat? One has got to examine. The kind of security threat presumably relates to China's investments in the United Kingdom, particularly in high technology, because there is also a suspicion that China's 5G installations could embed some sort of backdoor, but that's kind of not proven fear, as has been around for a long, long time. And of course, the United Kingdom has taken steps to really dismantle a lot of the 5G installations or 4G installations from Huawei. So what kind of security threats? And on the one hand, there is this rhetoric about security threat. And on the other hand, the United Kingdom is now recalibrating its trading and other relationship with China because they're now subject to very heavy tariffs, imposition of tariffs by their closest ally, the United States. And then the United States has become a much less reliable and predictable partner as far as the UK is concerned, even though they will not dare to say it openly and would like to continue to project the impression that they are very, very close allied, the anti-China alliance with the United States, and hence jacking up this anti-China rhetoric, repeating this refrain that China is an evil empire or a pernicious force and causing security threats. So I think that this is I think that Beijing sees through it all. On the one hand, Beijing doesn't want to make an enemy of anyone, not least in Europe, because of the Trump tariffs. Beijing is also trying to recalibrate for a better relationship with European countries, including the United Kingdom. And of course, China is also putting investments in electric vehicles in the United Kingdom, exemplified by the electric vehicle brand called LEV see London electric vehicles Coventry, produce electric cars in Coventry, the United Kingdom, but owned by a Chinese company, but yet creating jobs and contributing to the local economy. So I think that Beijing is showing a way how the engagement on trade and investment could benefit the host countries like the United Kingdom. But on the other one, having face this kind of reality, the United Kingdom leadership still wants to parlay this narrative that they are very, very close and alliance partner with the United States, and confronting China perceived aggression, and painting China into a corner. But on the other hand, is still trying to recalibrate relationship with China, particularly in trade and investment.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew K.P. Long for joining us as an independent China strategist from Hong Kong. Now we move on to Middle East. Pope Leo has greeted worshippers in Beirut, Lebanon, as he arrived to lead an open-air mass on the city's waterfront, where nearly 100,000 people were expected to gather. The first U.S. Pope is wrapping up a 3-day visit to Lebanon, his first trip abroad as head of the Catholic Church. During the visit, he has called for peace across the Middle East and warned that humanity's future is threatened by the region's relentless conflicts. He has also urged Lebanon's leaders to press on with peace efforts after last year's devastating war between Israel and Hezbollah and continued Israeli airstrikes. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.